expert who works with an accessible publishing expert who works with eBound Canada, the Accessible Books Consortium, and Adobe, among other organizations. Brady has more than 25 years, of trade publishing experience working in digital publishing for the past 15 years. Laura has created and converted ebooks, has trained publishers on accessible workflows, and consults for services organizations about how to publish inclusively while worrying about everyone's reading experience. She also teaches about ebooks, publishing, and accessibility at Simon Fraser University and Toronto Metropolitan University. To learn more about Laura, you can check out her website at laurabrady.ca. That link is also going in the chat right now. So Laura, everyone, please welcome Laura, first of all, for the presentation again called It's Not Just Alt Text, EPUBs and Accessible Digital Publishing.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Hope this works seamlessly. I hope you all can see my screen. It looks like you can from my end, so I'm going to assume that's the case. Thank you for that generous introduction, Kate. I want to just preface all this by saying that I am working from home and I have a dog who gets really excited whenever anyone walks past our house and who can be vocal. I hope that she won't be, fingers crossed, but fair warning. Okay. In fact, she just left my office because she's bored already. Haha. Okay. I hope that this won't be totally Mickey Mouse. I don't have a lot of experience with your group, but it's going to start out a little bit easy and then get quite complicated. Raise a white flag if it gets too technical, and if I'm using language that feels like, words or phrases that feel like you have absolutely no idea what I'm saying, please put a comment in the chat. Sometimes I get so mired in the technical stuff that I don't really realize how easy it is to misunderstand what I'm saying. Okay, let's get underway. All right, so an ebook in the simplest sense of the word is any form of digital book. Sometimes PDF is lumped in this category, but I'm going to spend all of today talking about EPUB. I'm just going to pause for a second to talk about PDF. PDF stands for Portable Document Format. It was originally developed by Adobe in 1993 to handle electronic documents. So PDFs can contain interactive elements such as the ability to fill in forms, and PDFs can also reflow, but they have to be specially created to do so. And since PDFs have a set physical size, even if they reflow, they will not render well on devices with smaller screens. And so most of the publishers that I work with don't deal in PDF at all. And that's partly because you can't sell a PDF in Amazon, Kobo, Google Books, Apple Books, etc. A lot of publishers sell PDF directly from their own website, and there are some library distributors that I understand can deal with PDF, but for the most part, I'm going to just focus on EPUB. Frankly, in my world, PDF is a bit of a swear word, but I'm going to try to not be mean about PDF today and just focus on nice, lovely EPUB. Okay, EPUB is a standard ebook file format. EPUB is actually a proprietary term for electronic publication, and EPUB is often spelled with a lowercase e and an uppercase p, but that's an incorrect usage. It's a proprietary term, and it should be all upper caps or uppercase or small caps if you prefer. EPUB is a zip format that's actually a collection of HTML files, style sheets, and perhaps some fonts, images, audio, or video files. It uses a web technology, that is HTML, to collect the pieces of a book into a teeny portable website, essentially. It's a website zipped up in a new container. EPUBs were created to be reflowable, lightweight files that would appear consistent across devices, so that no matter where you were reading, an iPhone or a mobile device, an e-reader, or a computer, the book would be legible and maintain a consistent style. It would respond to the screen size. The EPUB format was created by the International Digital Publishing Forum, also known as the IDPF, and published as an official standard in September 2007. All EPUB files have the suffix .epub at the end of the file. EPUB is an open format that was created by the IDPF and is now maintained by the World Wide Web Consortium, also known as the W3C. And it's important to emphasize that this is an open standard to which any member or invited expert of the W3C can contribute and help evolve. EPUBs have a lot of advantages over PDFs, including things like smaller file size, which makes downloading easier and more democratic for folks in low broadband situations, in addition to creating more storage space. And since EPUB was developed as an open standard, it uses HTML, which I mentioned before, which is an open markup language that you need nothing more than a simple text editor to create. The EPUB specification is currently at EPUB 3.1. It's actually at EPUB 3.3, but I'll talk about it EPUB 3.1 for ease of use. It allows for an expanded HTML vocabulary as well as some elements from HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. Compared to EPUB 2, there are many changes to the specification, including embedded metadata, a vastly different table of contents, and the addition of semantic tagging, which means the ability to use HTML tags to describe what parts of the books are which. For instance, you could tag a paragraph to be a sidebar in the print version, and the device that you're reading on would hypothetically know how to display it as a sidebar. Accessibility features are much more powerful in EPUB 3 as well, and semantic tagging improves the reading experience for visually impaired readers and others who depend on adaptive technologies to read ebooks. And so within the umbrella of EPUB, there are two flavors of EPUB, fixed layout EPUB and reflowable EPUB. A fixed layout EPUB is an EPUB where the elements are locked into place, and these are used to maintain the page layout for complex books, picture books, or any title where the layout is integral to the content. Each retailer has a slightly different version of fixed layout, but all incorporate elements of EPUB 3. And this flavor of EPUB is intended for children's picture books, manga, and graphic novels. I've spent an inordinate amount of time talking to publishers that are using this format because they like their print design. I'm fairly strict about fixed layout. It should be really only for graphic novels, manga, and children's picture books, and nothing else, because it's not a very good reading experience. But today I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about reflowable EPUB 3, and that's really all I'm going to talk about when it comes to fixed layout. So this is just a quick video that I'm going to let play in the background. This is a video from Thorium of a book called Structured Negotiation by Lainey Feingold. And this video just shows a little bit of what a reflowable EPUB can do. And I'm sure a lot of you already know all of this. When an EPUB is formatted with a reflowable layout, the contents of the page will automatically adjust both to the orientation of the device, i.e. landscape or portrait, and to its screen size. If desired, readers can also enlarge the text size, change the color of the text and or the background, as well as adjust spatial elements like margins, line spacing, and justification. For many readers, being able to make these types of adjustments is integral to their comfort in reading, but it's also important for those, it's incredibly important for users who have print disabilities. So there's an intense internal tension in ebook design. How do you design knowing that your end user is going to change everything? The font, the leading, the type size, the background, even whether or not the text is justified. Despite the utter chaos of that fact and the anxiety that it gives designers, this is truly one of the main advantages of ebooks. They are kind of a blank slate waiting for the reader to layer their needs on top of that bare structure. So, for example, a dyslexic reader can use a font that makes comprehension a little easier. And a print-disabled reader can convert the HTML to, say, a Braille output or have a screen reader voice the text. One of the key affordances of ebooks is this. They are what the reader needs them to be. And this is incredibly important when we're talking about accessibility. So what do I mean when I talk about affordances? Sorry, let me just put it. Okay. So an affordance is a property or feature of an object which presents a prompt on what can be done with this object. In short, affordances are cues which give a hint of how users may interact with something, no matter physical or digital. And I've laid out some of the affordances on this screen now. It's portable, so you can travel to New Zealand with 100 books, and it weighs just a few ounces. It's immediate. When you run out of books in New Zealand, you can quickly and easily buy or borrow more. It's private. No one around you can see what you're reading. It's easy. Many e-ink devices have low lighting for ease of use and easy on the blue light overloaded eyes as well. It's light, no more dropping a 500-page hardcover on your partner in the middle of the night. It's connected, no need if you need to look a word up. Many have built-in dictionaries, and hyperlinks work when activated. No trying to remember to look up something later. It's sustainable. No trees were murdered in the making of an ebook. It's accommodating. It's easier for someone with motor skills to hold an e-reader, for example, and easier for someone with low vision to read because they can make the font as big as they need it to. It's waterproof. Every time when I teach undergrads and I say it's waterproof, they all laugh like heck at that, but it's true. Many e-readers are actually waterproof for soaking in the tub or reading on the beach. It's borrowable. It's easy to load up on books from the library without leaving home, something that was incredibly important to many of us during the pandemic. It's searchable, hyperlinked navigation indices, and in addition to a search bar. It's annotatable, so you can highlight links, leave notes for yourself, and write in the margins, so to speak. And it's convenient. So you can read on a dedicated device, on your mobile device, on a desktop or a tablet, etc. A well-designed ebook is not just one that is typographically sound, although that counts, but one that is clean, lean, and agile. The HTML is as simple and clean as possible using semantic HTML5 so that the markup is making as many formatting decisions as possible. I'm going to talk a lot more about this in a minute, but there's a bumper crop of ebooks up for sale about which this cannot be said. The HTML is too generic, or it's full of complex CSS definitions that override the internal div span soup. And these kinds of poor market practices will get in the way of device fragmentation, conversion to other uses, and will not hold the structure and style as intended. So just a quick note about what I mean by device fragmentation. Any reflowable ebook needs to work well on Amazon or Kobo or Apple Books or Vital Source or Thorium and any of the other dozens of possible reading systems. Any ebook developer worth their salt has a means of testing that touches as many possible renderings as possible and probably owns a lot of devices as well. So let's switch gears and talk about accessibility. So why is EPUB the most accessible choice? And this comes down to the promise of technology. Digital technologies have opened access to books for people with print disabilities through the availability of digital formats and the affordance of assistive technologies and electronic devices. So not only has there been an explosion in assistive technologies, but mainstream devices and software increasingly ship with built-in accessibility features. In 1977, the first mass market personal computers were launched, and by 1984, they became widely used by individuals with print disabilities. To make personal computers accessible, users have needed to install extra software such as screen readers or screen magnification programs, or use additional hardware such as a refreshable braille display. These days, major operating systems include screen magnification and screen readers, for example, VoiceOver by Apple, as well as built-in features on personal computers and mobile devices. And while technology has been a boon for people with print disabilities, it can also be a barrier if not well designed. So this quote on your screen is from a man named Paul Harper, who is someone with a print disability. He's Australian. He's written a really excellent book about copyright that I recommend you look up. It's Harper with a U, Harpur. I should have put his name on the screen. I'm sorry about that. So scarcity is caused because books are not technologically accessible, which is an access failure, or they're technologically accessible but not available for use, which is a market failure, or technologically accessible but readers lack capacity to consume them, which is an instrumental failure. Publishers play a critical role in eliminating both the access failure and the market failure. In essence, digital publishing should have been a boon for readers with print disabilities. Suddenly, all these books that were completely unavailable to them as a print product should have been 100% readable, but they weren't. The World Blind Union says that there's a print famine where 90% of the books published in any given year are inaccessible to people with print disabilities. And this statistic was a key driver of the Marrakesh Treaty. And I don't plan to talk about the Marrakesh Treaty today, but I can just give a little sidebar about it. The Marrakesh Treaty is a treaty to which both Canada and the US are signatories. And it's run by WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, and administered by the Accessible Books Consortium from Geneva. I sit on the board of the Accessible Books Consortium in the interest of full disclosure. So in Canada, we have a copyright exemption built into our copyright laws that says that anyone can break copyright in order to make what's known as an alternate format or a more accessible format of any publication in order to make that accessible to folks with print disabilities. And so the print famine was a key driver behind the Marrakesh Treaty, which celebrated its 10th anniversary in 2023. So the Marrakesh Treaty is about 12 years old now. And traditionally, this fact has been because of quick and dirty conversions or because of the tools we use to create ebooks. And in this case, I'm talking specifically about Adobe InDesign, and I'll talk a lot more about this in a minute. So initially developed under the rubric of the IDPF in 2016-2017, the EPUB Accessibility Guidelines are in a 1.1 interaction as of May 2023, and are something that are constantly under revision, especially as the European Accessibility Act approaches. So I will refer to the EAA off and on through the course of this hour. The European Accessibility Act, which you may all be aware of, is due to go into force in June of this year, and it's set to have a dramatic impact on the publishing landscape because any publisher that does business in Europe and any of the countries that form the European Union has to meet fairly rigorous accessibility guidelines or be subject to fairly intense fines. The fines start at about €5,000 per infraction, and so in Ireland, for example, once you rack up €60,000 worth of fines, it comes with a threat of prison time, which is just bananas. But the European Accessibility Act is going to have a dramatic impact on publishing. So the EPUB accessibility guidelines are readily available to the public, but are of course written in standards language that can be challenging for most normal mortals to understand. And I'm just going to paste a link into the chat here so you have access to them if you want them. I will send them to everybody. I'm just going to paste them to Kate and let her send them to the entire chat. So the EPUB format has all the necessary features required for a person with a print disability, and it can also be used for people with other disabilities in line with the EAA requirements as well as for the general public. Its interoperability allows for EPUB to be supported by both consumer reading tools as well as by equipment dedicated to people with disabilities. Besides, the books in EPUB format can be automatically vocalized, transcribed in electronic braille, enlarged and modulated in their presentation. It also allows a complete graphical customization of content according to the needs of the users, as you saw in that little video a minute ago. And it can use something called semantic tagging that makes it easier for blind readers to consume. Okay. So there are many ways to create ebooks. Amazon has a tool called Kindle Create that aspiring authors can simply pour their Word file into and get an EPUB out the other end. Many self-publishers use a tool called Vellum, and Sigil is an ebook editing software package that the technically minded can use to make an ebook. The DAISY Consortium has a tool called Word to EPUB, which is excellent and works really nicely. And you can even make a quick and dirty ebook out of a Google Doc. The accessibility metrics of all these different methods of creating ebooks are they vary a little bit, and everything depends on clean source files. So what do I mean by a clean source file? In my 30 years of working in publishing, let me tell you that a clean source file is a unicorn. For example, if a Word file doesn't have headers that are formatted with style sheets and designated as headers, then the subsequent ebook won't have any structure. And so what I mean by that is when you're working in a word processing software, any word processing software, you can make a snippet of text look like a header by making it bigger and bolder, maybe a different color, maybe a different font, putting a little bit of space around it. So it looks like a header, but once that's converted into an ebook, it's not going to function as a header because you didn't use perhaps a style sheet to designate it as a header. So it has to be machine readable as a header, and that doesn't always happen. So if somebody makes some text look like a header but isn't formatting it as a header using style sheets, then that subsequent ebook won't have any structure. If the creator doesn't create a table of contents, then the subsequent ebook won't have any navigation. If the formatting is sloppy in Word, it will be magnified in the ebook. If there are no image descriptions in the source file, they are not going to magically appear in the ebook. And the elephant in the room when we talk about ebook creation tools is Adobe InDesign. In my considerable experience, 95% or more of publishers around the world use InDesign for print layouts. So one of the things I do is chair an accessibility subcommittee for the International Publishers Association. It's a very large body that has members from almost every country all around the world. And in my work with the IPA, I have polled publishers about how they create ebooks. And it is overwhelmingly using InDesign as the starting point for their ebook creation. So, and this is because most publishers use InDesign for print layout. Print is absolutely the primary format for most publishing projects, particularly in trade publishing where I work, where it is 80% of sales. Prioritizing the print layout makes business sense. And while you can make ebooks from InDesign, the same garbage in, garbage out principle applies. If the Word file isn't well formatted in the editorial process and the typesetter doesn't mind accessibility principles when planning style sheets and structure in the book layout, then the resulting ebook will absolutely have accessibility issues. So the technical debt from sloppy workflows in InDesign that created ebooks is real. So on the screen right now is a small cartoon with cavemen, I guess, that are pulling along a bucket full of rocks that's trying to roll on square wheels, and somebody behind them is holding up round wheels. And the cavemen pulling this bucket of rocks are saying, "No, thanks, we're too busy." And this is what I mean by technical debt. The market is flooded with mid ebooks that wouldn't pass an accessibility checker. InDesign creates decent ebooks, not great, not the worst, but it's getting better at it. And that's partly because the European Accessibility Act and other pieces of legislation are bearing down. But mostly it's because of a small group of experts who have been working closely with InDesign engineers for more than 2.5 years to fix a list of 33 significant accessibility issues. And I'm going to share another link to a GitHub where we've documented those issues. And if you're feeling really technically minded, you can poke around there and have a look. So the work has been very slow and has taken some threatening letters from the Federation of European Publishers and the Accessible Books Consortium, and some mild shaming from me, which I'm not above doing, but we're making progress. So I am going to share another link. This is to an article on inclusivepublishing.org, where we talk about the progress that's being made when it comes to fixing InDesign and ebooks that are made from InDesign. So thank you for sharing this, Kate. I appreciate it. I'm not sure why I can't share with everybody, but I'm too busy giving a talk to figure that out right now. So ebooks made with accessibility in mind are better and more usable ebooks all around. So according to BookNet Canada, an organization that I work closely with sometimes, they did a study in 2018 called How Do Readers Use eBooks? And in the survey, approximately half of all digital readers admitted to using accessibility features of some kind, even if they didn't realize that those are accessibility features. Features like font sizing, night mode, text orientation, reading mode, color modifications, and screen magnification. So it's a truism of working in accessibility that the more accessible a product is, the more usable it is for everybody who consumes that product. And this certainly bears out when it comes to digital publishing. All right, so let's switch gears and talk about ebooks and what makes them accessible. So this is going to get slightly more technical, and avert your eyes if you're nervous, if code makes you nervous, I guess. So there are 10 high-level principles of accessible ebook development. I'm going to talk about all of these in some detail, not too deep, but a little deep. And they're all on screen here. So separation of style and content, structure and navigation, semantics, images and how they're treated, something called a page list, definition of languages, accessible treatment of math and interactive content, and accessibility metadata. And this might look like an overwhelming list, but I'm going to explain what each of these mean in the context of EPUB. Okay, the separation of style and content. This is a foundational category to ebook accessibility and often one of the hardest to understand and move past. And that's partly because of a long tradition of thinking exclusively about how things look on the page, and partly because of a lack of information. So this quote on screen is from a man named Matt Garish, who works for the DAISY Consortium and who is the person who's actually written the EPUB spec. And he says that typographic conventions had to convey meaning in print because that was all that was available. They're still useful for sighted readers, but are the wrong place to be carrying meaning in digital content. And so this is where a publisher's potential print hangover is the heaviest. If your content isn't machine readable, then it's not perceivable by all of your readers. And it's critical to presume that your HTML is going to get separated from your carefully constructed CSS. CSS stands for cascading style sheets, and this is the file that travels along with the HTML in an ebook and says how it should look. And so what do I mean by this? I have seen a million books in my lifetime where a header is marked up in a P tag, and a P tag stands for a paragraph, with a class equals H1 or header or something like that. And that kind of markup is absolutely meaningless to reading systems. It's not machine readable. Using a P with something like a class of H1 or class equals header is the wrong choice when an H1 tag is right there, and that would be the more semantic and correct choice. Meaning should only come from markup. So this is another quote from Matt Garish's book, Accessible EPUB 3. Style is just a layer between your markup and the device that renders it, not an intrinsic quality you can rely on to say anything about your content. The meaning of the content should be the same both with and without styles or formatting applied. So the separation of style from markup is consequently not just about keeping styles, that is CSS, in a separate style from your markup, but recognizing that markup must convey meaning to be useful to all users, and that visual rendering is only one possible use case. So I'm going to talk, hopefully this will become a little clearer if you're confused at this point, but I want to talk now about HTML5 and using HTML5 tags correctly. The integrity of any single piece of content depends entirely on using the right element for the job. Every single HTML tag carries native semantics, and all HTML is mapped to APIs that communicate with assistive technologies. So HTML is a language of semantics, not a language of containers. Okay, that's a lot of words, and hopefully I'll explain what this means next. Print to digital exports are notorious for taking the path of least complexity, resulting in what I call div span soup. Div and span are HTML tags that are essentially meaningless. They're generic. When I train ebook developers, what I tell them is to banish div tags from their personal knowledge base. Using the correct tag for the job means that your content is machine readable, skippable, and legible. The main HTML mistakes that I see developers consistently missing in the wild are things like section, figure, big caption, and aside. Use them meaningfully and with intent. So publications typically have a primary narrative that users are expected to follow from beginning to end, and being able to navigate this dialogue uninterrupted is a key factor in making publications accessible. Rich markup allows secondary materials to be automatically excluded from text-to-speech playback or refreshable Braille rendering if the user doesn't want their reading experience interrupted. So something called skippability is critical to the print-disabled reading experience. So imagine you're reading, let's say, a piece of nonfiction and you hit a footnote reference number. You can skip that footnote reference number and come back to it later. So you don't have to go directly to the footnote and then back into text. Your reading experience doesn't have to be interrupted by that footnote. And that footnote can be skippable. And the same applies to things like asides and images and tables. So sidebars can be skipped, images and figures can be skipped to focus on the primary narrative. So for example, so there's some HTML on screen right now, and any HTML chunk should be in a section tag. And when you use InDesign to create ebooks, every chunk of HTML is going to be in a div tag. It's just their default. We're working on it, but that's their default. Subheaders and subsequent content should have another nested section tag around it. Marginalia, notes, sidebars, etc., should be marked up as an aside. All ancillary content belongs inside this kind of tag, an aside tag. And where a section is body content, figure is secondary content that's still part of the main flow of the document, but it's secondary. And this usually refers to things like inline images, figures, maps, or tables when they are content specific. The semantic markup of editorial breaks and context breaks is with an HR tag. And using an HR tag for a section break means that when someone is using text-to-speech or assistive technology to have content read to them or vocalized to them, when the assistive text hits an HR tag, there's going to be a significant pause so that you know that there's a context break there. You can build CSS definitions around that tag to include an image or asterisk or whatever suits the design, but that's the idea. So this slide on screen right now is what I call the kind of holy grail of ebook development. When I teach ebooks, I have my students keep this and refer to it constantly. A lot of the character styles, almost everything in that right-hand column is a character style, and almost all of those directly out of InDesign would be in a generic span tag if you don't sort of intervene and make InDesign do a better job for you. Okay, navigation is the next high-level accessibility principle that I want to talk about. No reader ever complained that there were too many ways to get inside of content. There's no such thing as too much navigation. And a good ebook has a thorough table of contents with as many levels as there are headers. And it's important to be aware that some reading systems won't display anything more than 2 levels deep, but that's okay. You should still build it as deep as possible. And so the example on screen here is a book called North of America, and it's about Canadians and the American Century. It's a University of British Columbia press book. It has a table of contents. It has a page list. I'm going to talk more about what that means in a minute. It has a section called landmarks. Landmarks are kind of the bones of the structure. If that had a roll down on that, it would show the cover, the start of content, any back matter, that sort of thing. It also has a list of tables and a list of illustrations. So I counsel ebook developers to build a lot of supplemental lists, like lists of illustrations, lists of tables, lists of maps, etc., and a full set of landmarks. Landmarks are that breakout section in the EPUB pre-navigation, which lists the bones of a document, such as the front matter, title page, copyright page, body matter, TOC, bibliography, index, etc. So there's no such thing as too much navigation. The more robust an ebook's navigation is, the easier it is for all kinds of readers to use and consume that book. So navigation is important, and we can talk about structure in a minute, but what I want you all to know about reading ebooks is, from a print-disabled point of view, is that most print-disabled readers navigate through content by going from header to header. So they'll scan from an H1 to an H1 to an H1, or an H1 to an H2 to an H3. And so those things need to be marked up properly in order for that print disabled reading experience to be meaningful and understandable. Okay, let's talk about what a page list is. Closely related to the issue of navigation is a page list. Developers should mark print equivalent page breaks in the digital version of the content. This means that a variety of readers of the content can literally always be on the same page. So people using a teacher using the same book in a classroom where some people are using the print version and some people are using the digital version, they can all literally, when he says turn to page 54, they can all be on page 54, no matter which version of the content that they're using. It's also one more way to navigate into the content. And so in the image on screen here, this is from Apple Books. And you can see on the left-hand side, there's a little grayed out 20 in the margin of on the left-hand side of the page there. And that he promised unsuspecting kids stuff to get what he wanted. That's where page 20 starts. That's where print page 20 starts. And then if you look down at the bottom of the page, it says that that first page on the left is page 19 to page 20. And then the page on the right is just page 20. And that's because in this book, the print equivalent page breaks have been marked up. And so that's how that's going to look in Apple Books. It's going to look a little bit different in each reading system, but every reading system is now set up to deal with page lists and to present it to the user in various ways. And then side note, it's what I tell ebook developers that they have to declare the source ISBN in the OPF metadata. So the OPF is kind of the engine of the ebooks, and that's where all the metadata lives in the ebook. And when you declare source ISBN in that metadata, then people know what these print equivalent page breaks refer to. Is it the hardcover version or trade paperback or the mass market, etc.? That's where that print equivalent page list, that's what it's connected to. Okay, structure. So make sure that the EPUB has a clear structure with headers and subheaders and that they cascade accurately using the right element for the job. I'm going to talk about the ACE by Daisy accessibility checker in a minute, but this is one of the main focuses of the ACE accessibility checker and a frequently misunderstood part of ebook development work. The top level header in any HTML file should generally be an H1, and there shouldn't be an H5 without an H1, an H2, an H3, and an H4 above it. Print disabled readers rely on accurately marked up headers to navigate through a document. So it's that simple. So this screenshot on screen shows a table of contents that goes several levels deep, and those levels are pulled from all those headers in that document. Okay, semantics. So what on earth do I mean by semantics? Semantics are the elements that you use to craft the EPUB. And let me back up. Structure is the elements you use to craft your EPUB content, and semantics is the additional meaning that you layer on top of those structures to better indicate what they represent. Semantics are like the blue, green, or yellow sticky notes that you use on the side of a manuscript to give a flag extra meaning. And for users of assistive technologies which rely on an understanding of the underlying markup in order to facilitate navigation, these semantics or ARIA roles are the attributes that allow for more precise meanings to be applied to generic tags. So this is a quote from the DAISY knowledge base, which I'll also talk about in a minute. A limitation of the core HTML markup grammar is that it's not well suited for differentiating common publishing structures. There may be hundreds of aside elements in a publication, for example, but reliably identifying which ones represent notes from sidebars, from warnings and alerts has not been possible. And for sighted users, the deficiency this causes has been masked by the enhanced visual rendering that CSS style sheets afford, backgrounds, borders, and shading, etc. Those are used to convey roles visually. For users of assistive technologies which rely on an understanding of the underlying markup in order to facilitate navigation, as I said, web-based technologies have only had limited accessibility because primary and secondary material was often indistinguishable below the visual surface. So in order to make publications more accessible, you need to consider that many users will be interacting with the content in non-visual ways. And for that reason, the logical reading order must be defined at the markup level. And to facilitate this discovery, the ARIA role attribute allows more precise meanings to be applied to the generic tag. So quick note, semantics are referred to in a number of ways. The original EPUB 3 specification, which was published in 2011, made a provision for something called EPUB type rule. The full EPUB type vocabulary is available from InDesign and has been since 2012. Unfortunately, the EPUB type attribute was intended to serve a similar function to ARIA roles in EPUB 3, but accessibility support never materialized. So as ebooks move closer to web technologies, so we are moving closer to web semantic technologies. Ebook developers need to migrate towards ARIA roles, or what is often known as DPUB ARIA. So ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. DPUB ARIA is Digital Publishing Accessible Rich Internet Applications. And you may have heard of WAI-ARIA, which stands for Web Accessibility Initiative, Accessible Rich Internet Applications. I hate acronyms, and these are especially confusing, I think. And there's a full set of common semantics at the DAISY Knowledge Database, and there's a link on your screen, kb.daisy.org/publishing/doc/html/dpub-aria. Okay, semantics are confusing, and I find when I'm training developers, particularly undergrads, they have no idea what I'm talking about, and it takes some time for that to sink in, but it's a really important piece of the accessibility puzzle. All right, let's move on to images now. Don't use an image where text will do. So setting a complex table, for example, as an image addresses a situational disability, that is the inability to view an entire table at once, by creating another disability, limited visual access to the content. So give readers credit to understand the limitations their device imposes and give them the flexibility to find other ways to read. So I always tell ebook developers to avoid setting text as an image with all their weight and might. So this often applies to diacritics. I have seen so many ebooks in my life where people have turned accented characters into images because they couldn't find a font with the right character. It's so aggravating. Avoid images of diacritics, of tables, and of highly designed text. So I often advocate for turning tables into lists with the header columns repeated along the left side. Flip tables on their side and resync them. It's worth simmering here for a second. Keep the data live, but consider presenting it differently. One of the reasons to consider this is that tables wider than 4 columns just don't work all that well in ebook, and it's important to be aware of that. But avoid images of text with all your heart. And then image descriptions. It's not just alt text, but sometimes it is about alt text. Images must be described. It's critical to the print disabled reading experience. Readers consume content in a wide variety of ways, and by not describing your images, you are leaving out an important chunk of your readership. Where an image is not put into context by the surrounding text, it must be described. There are many ways to do this, but the simplest is just to use the alt text field. And while there's no technical limitation on how much text can be included in the alt, common practice is to limit it to a brief sentence or two. Lengthy alt text can be burdensome for the end user and difficult to navigate. This method is good when no markup at all is required of the described text. There are other methods of doing it. There's a way, an extended description or a long description. I'm not going to go into that detail here, but there are other ways to do that. And I'm happy to point you all to explainers about that if you like. And where an image is purely decorative, for example, a little doodad to mark an editorial space or something at the start of chapters, like a little flower or something typographic, something floral or whatever. Those are purely decorative. In that case, the alt text field should be left empty, and an ARIA role of presentation should be added to the image tag. And this will tell assistive technology that there's nothing to see here and to move along. I also tell ebook developers not to skip logos. They often just completely skip over logos. I don't know why. They should be described. Define languages. The primary language of any given HTML file should be declared at the root level in that HTML file, in addition to being declared in the ebook's metadata. Assistive technology needs that language declared in order to render the text-to-speech playback accurately. In addition, and this part is very important, any language shift within your content should be marked up. Snippets of French, like the one you see on screen, J'aime le chocolat, should be marked up with a language shift, saying that this is now French. And I have seen this work really brilliantly in my life. Assistive technology will be hopping along, reading some English text using English intonation, and then get to a little snippet of French that's marked up accurately. And it often switches voice. I don't know why, but it often does switch voice. And it reads it correctly, j'aime le chocolat. Instead of trying to articulate that using English intonation, j'aime le chocolate, they wouldn't sound good. It will get read correctly by read aloud services if it's marked up correctly. Okay, I'm just gonna mention this and then flow right past it because this is definitely out of scope for today. Math is tricky and a little out of scope for this workshop, but MathML has been under development for some time and is increasingly well supported in the out there in the world. Writing MathML is still incredibly complex, but it's coming along. So ebooks with interactive or audiovisual content should have alternate access to that content, so captions, subtitles, controls, transcripts, etc. Being able to control the timing of audiovisual content is extremely important for cognitively challenged readers. Okay, accessibility metadata. This is, I don't have a lot of time left, so I'm going to try to breeze through this quickly, but this is a really important piece of the puzzle. The current publishing landscape is a beehive of accessibility work with many projects happening and so much good work being carried out. It's a marvel and a triumph to see this happening, but, and you knew this was a but coming, none of this work is of any value if users can't find the content that meets the reading need. Reading is a very personal experience, whether for work, school, or leisure. Readers with print disabilities are no different in this regard, except that they're often using assistive technologies to find books and rely on the descriptors to tell them things about the book that they're contemplating buying or borrowing. Will it work with my screen reader? Will the images be described? Does it have a robust navigation that will make the reading experience of a person with a print disability manageable? The good news is that many publishers are making good, accessible products and are describing them well in the data. The mid news is that we have a long way to go collectively when it comes to accessibility metadata in the supply chain. In Canada, for example, where I'm from, there's a swath of publishers who put detailed attention into the schema metadata that lives in the EPUB, but who have little to no ONIX metadata. And this leaves users in the regrettable position of having to download samples of books to see if they can read it before buying them, or to go through the tedious process of returning purchase because it's illegible to them. And that is not a marker of a healthy publishing ecosystem. So there are three kinds, there's actually four kinds of accessibility metadata. There's the schema.org accessibility metadata, and this lives in the EPUB. It's included in the OPF file of the EPUB. Then there's the ONIX accessibility metadata, which is included in an ONIX record, which is an XML file that travels into the supply chain alongside a digital product like an ebook. And then there's conformance or evaluation metadata, which is included in the OPF file and in the ONIX file. And then there's MARC 21 records, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. ONIX is the industry standard, and this is what almost all publishers are using to describe their content. Oh, great. I'm just seeing Kate's thing in the chat. I'm glad you're going to talk more about math. That's awesome. ONIX is an XML-based standard for rich book metadata, providing a consistent way for publishers, retailers, and their supply chain partners to communicate a wide range of information about their products. So when you see a product on Amazon or Indigo or bookshop.org, all the descriptors about that product are almost certainly coming from the ONIX data that travels into the supply chain alongside an ebook. It's a commercial data format designed to be used globally and not limited to any one language or the characteristics of a specific national book trade. It's widely used throughout the book and ebook supply chain in North America, Europe, and Australasia, and is increasingly being adopted in the Asia Pacific region and South America too. So there's lots of basic bibliographic metadata that comes from ONIX, but there's also a ton of accessibility metadata that can also be built into the ONIX metadata. It's captured in something called Code List 196. I'm just going to skip ahead really quickly to show you something. I'm not going to be able to get all this, but this link at the very top, I will share these. Slides with the organizers so they can share them with you. But I wrote a whole report on accessibility metadata that you can download from the apln.ca. And that's a good place to read more about ONIX and schema and conformance metadata. Thank you, Kate. She just put the link in there. So let me, so the schema.org metadata lives in the EPUB. It's written by hand. It can also be written via InDesign now, thanks to the work that we've been doing with the InDesign engineers. The conformance metadata is meant to be, meant to indicate when a book is certified accessible. There's an organization from California called Benetech, has a program called Global Certified Accessible, where they certify a publisher's workflow, and that can be indicated in the metadata as well. Okay, so metadata equals discoverability. I don't have to tell librarians about that, I'm sure. But there's a link on your screen. It's a bit.ly link. I work a lot with NNELS, the National Network for Equitable Library Services, and they have created these free walkthroughs of how to browse and borrow books. One is for scholarly publishing, one is in the trade market, and one is in a library context. They're excellent, and I strongly recommend those. Okay, I'm going to switch really quickly to tools. Thorium is a really excellent tool. It's a reading system developed by EDR Labs in France. It's built on the Redium engine, and it's designed with accessibility in mind. That little video that you saw earlier was from Thorium. It's designed to work with light content protection, or LCP, which is a version of digital rights management that is explicitly built to accommodate the requirements of the EAA. There's also something called EPUB Checker, which you can download from pagina.gmbh. And this is just a way to check that the EPUB is valid. I'm not going to talk any more about that because I want to leave a little time for questions. The tool that you all might find the most useful is 8x-Daisy. It's an indispensable tool for ebook developers. To check the accessibility of content. It's built on a web accessibility checker called ACT, but it's tailored for the EPUB format. EPUB checker is about the validation of your EPUB. 8x-Daisy goes much deeper on specifically accessibility metrics. And a book that passes 8x-Daisy is not necessarily 100% accessible. The developers of 8x-Daisy say that it goes about 30% of the way to checking the accessibility of an EPUB. Passing ACE validation is not the same as meeting the requirements of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. A clean report only means that the issues ACE can check for have passed. And then the SMART tool is another tool that you all might find useful. It's publicly available for anyone to use, and it tests against a number of accessibility metrics, and is a really great tool for supply chain vendors, publishers, anyone responsible for the distribution of EPUB, and anyone who wants to systematically check an EPUB for accessibility conformance. And then finally, the DAISY Accessible Publishing Knowledge Base is extremely technical, so fair warning. It's de rigueur for developers to use, but it's written by people who write standards for a living and who are very good at technical language, not plain language. If you'd like a resource that is written in plainer language, I recommend the Accessible Publishing Learning Network. It's apln.ca, which may be a better resource for the slightly less technical among you. And then I'm going to linger on the screen with the resources so that you can copy those down quickly if you'd like to. And let's switch to at questions. We have just 5 minutes left. I'm happy to stay if people want to stay to answer more questions. But I did have to breathe through the back end of that. I'm so sorry.
No, of course. Thank you so much again, Laura, for that wonderful presentation. Just speaking for myself, I have learned so much, and I am absolutely going to spend some time experimenting with some of the tools you've shared with us today.